Welcome back to this fourth session and third module of the program. As you know, today we're going to focus on appraising evidence. So the session will be led by Naren and Bavika. But after that, at the end of the session, we're going to have another application session on informal economy, which will be delivered by Frédéric Lapère, with director of a priority action program on transition from the informal to the formal economy at the ILO. For sure, I mean, Narendran will go will introduce him more appropriately, for sure. My is just a sort of overall overview of what is today's agenda. Before starting, just, a few things to mention. Do not forget that, now we strongly encourage you to go ahead with book your one-to-one, your slot with Bavika, Naren, or with both of them as concerned the policy brief. So as Naren mentioned last time, now it's time to go ahead with take a step forward and start thinking and let's say defining the policy brief. Also because in a few weeks we're going then to have the final presentation, so we are at the middle of let's say of this learning path, but I mean it's good to start thinking and focusing on this important aspect. Having said that, as always, invite you to turn on the camera to facilitate interaction, unless you are not you cannot manage to turn on the camera, and as always, I mean let's keep it interactive and thank you all of you for your also engagement on the campus platform. Thank you, and now over to you, Naren.
Beautiful, thank you, Vincenzo. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, good afternoon to you all, wherever you are connecting. Great to see you. If you can just put in your camera so that I can say hello and see your beautiful faces. Great.
Hi, Naren. Sorry for jumping in directly. I can say there is already maybe an important question that will be better to answer before starting the session. It is from Sarah about the policy brief. It's a question about if there is a specific structure, I mean, that maybe you are expecting a specific structure as concerned the policy brief, and so that you will recommend in the context of this course.
Absolutely. Thanks, Vincenzo. Thank you, Sarah. We are coming to that. You are preempting our what we're going to say. We'll give you a template. In fact, you have to just fill in the blanks. We're making your life easy. It's coming on the next session. Today is appraising evidence. From next week, we are starting to write. All right. All right. Everybody, not everybody's there, but at least the most motivated ones are here, and I'm thrilled to see you all. Right. So today's session will be essentially consisting of how would you appraise and evaluate the evidence that you have already got. If you have been following this training from day one, we are going step by step. So last week, last session, when Bavika was talking about searching for your evidence, you should have searched for your evidence and done your assignments, which was required of you, where you would have at least looked for one or two strong evidence that you might use in your policy briefs. And before we talk about policy briefs, I hope everybody has got their policy questions correct now. And I want now for everybody to just put your policy questions in the chat box, the ones that you have finally agreed to, right? Put it in the chat box. And from there, Bavika will compile a list. And that's the final policy questions that we will then work with. And we will give some examples to help you draft your policy questions based on the topics that you would have written today for us, okay? So now we are on the fourth session, in fact, yeah. So by now you should have got your policy questions correct. Before I start going into how we appraise evidence, is there any questions? I know Sarah had a question. We have answered that. Anybody else has any questions? Or any comment? Dedra, please.
Okay, so You started to put our questions in the chat. What if next week we decide on a different question? Would it be too late?
No. It's a great one. Yeah. If I mean, remember when we say when you design your policy question, it can be an iterative process. Huh? Maybe you got it wrong. You want to come back to the step one where you identify the issue and go back to putting into a question. By now you should be 90% done. Like you know the topic already. I think Narendra had 2 policy questions. But by now you should have already made your choices, because if you have not decided now, you'll have lots to catch up after in terms of searching evidence, and now we'll be appraising. So by now you should be done there, okay? But of course, you can change your policy question. It's not a problem, Dedra, but try to get it settled by now. Any others? Thanks, Dedra. Yeah, Clara.
Yes, regarding my policy question, I don't know whether it is too broad.
Tell me.
Yes, it was about reconciliation measures at work for women in order to, I mean, kind of designing policies in order not to generate burdens to worker women, so that they do not paralyze their careers, their professional careers when becoming mothers, and the link between this fact and the lower natality rate in some countries, like for instance in my country. But I mean, this is very broad. I don't know whether this can be a policy question or I have to shorten it.
Yeah, for that, we can have one-to-one discussions to really narrow it down. But the more specific your policy question is, the better it is. So that when you propose some policy recommendations, they are concrete and actionable. Okay? Not to be too broad, like I want to solve the youth unemployment, or I want to generate economic growth, and here are my policy recommendations. It's really broad, right? So the more specific you are, the better it is. Those of you who want to have a discussion either with me or Bhavika on your policy question, we are here to do that. But also you can ask us on the discussion forum. I will be able to guide you through this discussion forum. I think I have been doing that for some time on your policy questions. All right?
Thank you.
Lovely. You know, there's one thing I wanted to mention. One story for you to know. Whatever we're saying here, at times it could be uninteresting, boring at times, not relevant to you. But one day you'll use those things that we are talking about, since you are all involved in policy making. You know, when I was working in Fiji, I used to take an aeroplane to go to my island. Fiji is a small island. Many islands are there, and I used to live in one island where my parents stayed, and I was working in the capital. The flight was 45 minutes. So every weekend I used to go back to my parents' place. I used to work in the capital, fly back. So when you go in the plane, and it was in the 1990s, where, you know, those small planes like 12-seater, 15-seater, my Caribbean colleagues might know all the small planes, you know, the ATRs. And it has become a habit of us to go and sit down in the plane after a week's, tiring week. You go back home. So when you enter a plane, you know, normally the pilot or the air hostesses or the steward give you the security instructions, right? Your seat belts, fasten your seat belts. The life jacket is under your seat. Here's the exit. This and that. You become so get used to that you never pay attention to that anymore, right? And that's what was happening to us. You know, we were also, so much busy, we don't pay attention. So one day it happened that we went to the airport, we sat in the plane, security briefings, whatever goes, we fly. And Fiji being a tropical country, the weather changes. It starts shaking and rough weather, and we got all nervous. So after like 35-40 minutes, the pilot says we're going to land, but we're having some difficulties. So he makes his landing, goes to the landing. He's not able to land. And in those days, we did not have the GPS. It was like by visual, okay? So he was looking at the airport with all the clouds, he was not able to see. So he goes down, turns around and comes back. He says, okay, let me give another second try. So he goes back again, tries to land, not able to see. So he's not able to land. He said, okay, let me give another try. The third one, if I'm not able to do that, we'll go back to where we came from. But he said, before I'll do that, I'll go over the security instructions once again. Security instructions one again. Life jacket, oxygen mask. Where is the exit? Literally, we were all paying attention. Where is our life jacket? We checked it out. Leslie, we took it out and we were looking at it. Everybody, we were all very nervous. I'm here to tell you the story. The pilot managed to land the plane. Bumpy, but landed it. The thing I learned that at times we are told things we don't pay attention. It's not relevant up to the day where it might be useful. So put those things, these tools in your toolbox. One day when you'll evolve in your careers, writing policy briefs, the communication synthesizing will always be useful. So that's why I'm saying if you maybe, as I said, it's not interesting, relevant today, but tomorrow it might be. Just keep these things in your toolbox. All right, with this story, I think most of you have joined now. We'll start the session, which is on appraising evidence. All right. Just let me start my slides. There you go. So the aim of appraising evidence is, we'll come to that, but before we'll go into the how to appraise evidence, just to show you what we did in our last session, what Bhavika had presented to you on the searching strategy. It's right on there in terms of the summary of what she has presented, the 6 steps of search design. I hope you remember that, understanding the research, understanding your request, familiarizing yourself with the topic, using your network, choosing the right types of literature, which sources you'll get, and then you search effectively. And some of the sources she has mentioned, the evidence products, all those things. What is a published literature? What is a gray literature? Peer-reviewed? All these things were discussed. If you have any questions on last week's session, you can ask now, or you can put the questions in your evaluations or in the discussion forum. Right? So today's session will basically be the following. By the end of this session, you should be able to judge the reliability and credibility of the evidence that you have selected in order for you to answer your policy questions. You should be able to apply some basic ways of appraising the evidence. And there are 4 things that we are looking into: the sources, the relevance, whether objective or objective or subjective, and the quality of those evidence. There are 4 things that we'll be looking into. And we will also be showing how you will be able to compare and contrast the strengths and weakness of some of the common products that Bhavika has mentioned in the last session. So these are the 3 things that you should be able to do at the end of this training. But before we do that, there's a poll coming up. Have you ever been challenged by someone for using a certain type of evidence in your work or in a conference or where you're presenting something? Bhavika, the poll? Yep, there you go. Have you ever been challenged? Yes or no? Who never faced? Right, it's quite equally divided. Absolutely, yes. Have one debate every now and then. Yes, I had respectful discussions about evidence. No, never faced any challenges. All right, so it's basically equally, very equally divided. Although yes, had a respectful discussion about evidence is a little bit of majority. Lovely. this is what we are going to talk about now in terms of how to appraise evidence, right? Why do you think we need to appraise evidence? Anybody? Why do you think we need to appraise evidence, evaluate evidence that you will get?
For its relevance,
It's
it
We-
comes into our policy question, and also what is the correctness, and several things. It is not there when you are searching in the Google, or you get a lot of unwanted also. You have to filter that first to your requirements. That
Thank
is
you,
why we-
Nareshman. Very good. Whatever comes on the internet may not be solid of good quality. I think Beatrice has a microphone on. Yeah.
I was just saying that to be sure that it's credible and reliable.
Right. Anybody else?
Yeah, we have a couple of comments in the chat, actually now 3 comments. One is Narendra for credibility. Then Andre, he said that there is hardly any evidence that is not tainted by personal bias. Well, actually, let me say also my personal, yeah, I agree with you from this perspective, Andre. Then Shane Palmer to test its validity and reliability. Yosina, make sure accurate data. And finally, Sadika, she mentioned significance, relevance, and accuracy.
Beautiful. This is exactly what we're talking about, We need credentials. Anybody can, as Narshima was mentioning, anybody could upload anything on the internet, whether it's good or no. So we need the credentials, right? Anybody could update information without us knowing it's old information, new information, we really don't know, right? So we need to check on those things. Can anyone say anything they like, be true or false? So we need to check whether that, again, who sponsored that, right? And as I mentioned, track changes of things that has been updated or no. So basically what we're talking about here, when we say appraising evidence, is asking the right questions. And that's what I wanted to show with you here. I have a video clip. I hope you can hear the sound. It's about leading questions. Let me play if you can hear. Do you hear the sound?
It's quite low.
Bernard, that was precisely what you had to avoid. How did this come about? I shall need a very
But
good
we can hear it, I guess, no?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
What's that got to do with it? It's going to happen just because prime ministers are very keen on them. Neville Chamberlain was very keen on peace.
He thinks it's a vote winner.
Ah, that's more serious. Now, what makes him think that?
Well, the party have had an opinion poll done. It seems all the voters are in favour of bringing back national service.
Well, I have another opinion poll done showing the voters are against bringing back national service.
We can't be for it and
Of
against.
course they can, Bernard. Have you ever been surveyed?
Yes, well, not me actually, my house. Oh, I see what you're saying.
Bernard, you know what happens. Nice young lady comes up to you. Obviously, you want to create a good impression. You don't want to look a fool, do you? No. So she starts asking you some questions. Mr. Woolley, are you worried about the number of young people without jobs?
Yes,
Are you worried about the rise in crime among teenagers?
yes,
Do you think there's a lack of discipline in our comprehensive schools?
yes,
Do you think young people welcome some authority and leadership in their lives?
yes,
Do you think they respond to a challenge?
yes.
Would you be in favour of reintroducing national service?
Oh, well, I suppose I might.
Yes or no?
Yes.
Of course you would, Bernard. After all you've told, you can't say no to that. So, they don't mention the first 5 questions, they publish the last one.
Is that really what they do?
Well, not the reputable ones, no, but there aren't many of those. So, alternatively, the young lady can get the opposite result. Oh. Mr. Woolley, are you worried about the danger of war?
Yes,
Are you worried about the growth of armaments?
yes,
Do you think there's a danger in giving young people guns and teaching them how to kill?
yes,
Do you think it's wrong to force people to take up arms against their will?
yes,
Would you oppose the reintroduction of national service?
yes.
Well, you can see, Bernard, the perfect balanced sample. So, we just commissioned our own survey for the Ministry of Defence. See to it, Bernard.
He's going to say,
Right. That was basically to show you appraising is about asking the right questions. So here you saw in that clip, yes, Prime Minister. It depends on how you ask the question, you can get the responses from the people that you're asking, is how you design your question, right? So that's what we wanted to show. There will be, as I mentioned, 4 things that you have to look into when you are appraising evidence: the source and the credibility that will be going in each of these rubrics in the next slides, the relevance of that particular evidence in relation to your policy question, the quality of that evidence, and whether it's objective or subjective. And as we saw in the clip just before, assessing evidence is all about asking the right question in light of the evidence that you have got. Right. So now in our eCampus, we have also put a lot of materials. If you go to the eCampus, there are a lot of materials about evaluating the overall strength of a body of evidence, and there are the definitions of certain terms and evidence product. If you go into the module 3, you'll find a lot of reading materials. So all these things are also given more in detail in the eCampus. Now, coming back to the first category of the source and the credibility of those who are putting that evidence. So the first thing, as I mentioned, is the factors to consider about the authors. Are the authors experts in their field that they are talking about? If you get an evidence, suppose on occupational safety and health in Trinidad and Tobago, and the person who has wrote that article is a ILO specialist working on chemical hazards, for example, you know he is an expert or she is an expert, compared to if somebody who is a public sector government worker dealing with school education policy, and he wrote something about chemical products as a hazard, and he has never published anything on that particular topic. You might not believe so much of what that person has written. So in other words, whatever you get, try to find out whether that particular person is an expert in the field or not. That will answer, they will give you some hints whether that's credible or not. Have they been cited by other authors? If you get a particular piece of information or a paper, have they been cited? That's another gauge of quality control, whether that particular piece of information is used by other peers, and they're a very good way of doing this assessment is just look into the Google Scholar, for example, whether that author has got some citations. Check it out. It's very easy. It's all online on your fingertips. The other thing about the authors you have to know is, are they known to have particular perspectives? You know, we were talking the other day on the discussion forum, those who are leaning towards the left, those who are leaning towards the right, those who are pro-labor, anti-labor, this and that. You can know in terms of what is their particular perspectives. Again, by reading their work, you can understand what side do they belong. For example, if I'm working with the International Labor Organization and I say that minimum wage is not good for employment, right? If I say, maybe I will be fired from my organization, right? So you know certain perspective of the authors already, right? They have a tendency. And the last thing you have to know, are they attached to an institution that is considered highly or no? But then again, that has to be judged in its own right. At times, the people who could be working on with a university nobody knows in Uganda or in Sri Lanka, but they have published fantastic stuff, really good experts, or somebody who was at the University of Harvard or Oxford or some of those reputable institutions, which shows how serious that institutions are. So if you know that somebody is attached to or affiliated with Harvard University, or the top ranking, the Ivy Leagues of universities in America or the UK, you know they are quite reputable. So you can, there's a more chances that the evidence that you get is of high quality compared to some of the institutions that you don't even know about them. So those are the 4 questions you ask about the authors. Are they experts? Have they been cited? Do they have a particular perspective? Are they attached to a reputable organization? The second set of questions about the source and credibility is that who is sponsoring that particular information that you have got? What type of organization is it? It's a private company, it's an NGO, research organization, a policy institute, international organization, or a government. What type of institution is it that? You have to know that. Once you know the type, how was it established? Right? How long it has been in business? Do they have any vested interest? Suppose it's an entity that was created by the private sector. Suppose for lobbying for fossil fuels, right? You know they have a particular bias, that kind of institutions. They have a vested interest. How is that organization funded? Who funds them? For example, if it's coming from an international organization like the ILO or the United Nations, you know how it's funded. It's funded through the public taxpayers' money, right? It's your organization compared to World Bank or IMF. That's the private shareholders' money, right? Those who are members, they pay, and it's also the private capital that pays. Different NGOs, for example, or foundations, the Ford Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundations, there are many, many foundations. Who funds them? The World Economic Forum, they have a vested interest. So you have to know what type of organization is that, when was it established, how was it established, do they have any vested interest, how is it funded? So these are the 4 questions you ask. The third category of things that you have to know of that particular evidence in order to judge for the source and credibility of that particular evidence is factors about the publication method itself. I mean, Bhavika last time was talking about those evidence products, right? So this has to be once again judged in its own merit of reference to the author's credentials. I was mentioning that. But what do you know about the editor, for example, or the editorial board, and how their editorial policy influences what is published? For example, the Wall Street Journal, for example, they have a specific editorial policy, or the Financial Times, or in your case, in your daily newspapers. What does Al País say? Or the Jamaican Daily Star talks about, the Philippine Times, or the Straits Times. I mean, each newspaper has its own editorial policy. There could be pro-government, anti-government, left-wing, right-wing. You know what is their policy. So you know where it comes from, which kind of publication is it. If it's a journal, magazine, is it well regarded? For example, some of the international magazines that I'll be showing in my next slide, you will see whether those are important, well regarded or no. But as we mentioned, that has to be really judged on its own merit. Okay. For example, if some of the reliable sources that you can get is, I'll be showing you one of the databases later on that ILO has. It's called the Labor Doc. If you type Labor Doc of ILO, you'll find fantastic information on all labor issues, right? There's another ILO's database called the NormLex about the conventions and recommendations that has been ratified or not by the member countries. Or if any there are cases, any problems, the reports of the Committee of Experts on the application of standards, all the things are there. Google Scholar is another reliable source. There has been already a fact checking. Therefore, you don't have to go behind and check the facts again, because it has been done already, right? Now, here's something that I want to discuss. So if you find something coming from the United Nations, would you think it's credible? Yes, yes. Right. ILO and other UN agencies credible?
Yes.
Beautiful. World Bank, IMF?
Yes.
Absolutely. Regional development banks, like
Yeah.
Yes,
beautiful. How about some NGOs or Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, Oxfam?
it depends.
Depending.
And
To some extent, yeah.
that's the question. It depends, right? It depends. So you can see how it comes down. It boils down from the top authority. It comes down, and then some of the, small regional or national NGOs that have particular positions. You know how they are, right? So that's how you judge. Now I'll give you some of the international, how could I say, magazines and newspapers. At the top of the notch in terms of ranking is the Associated Press. That's the best. If anything comes from the AP, it's 100% verified and checked. Right? And then comes the Wall Street Journal, again, very reputable newspaper, very well regarded. Then the BBC, in terms of the ranking of newspaper and magazine articles. The Economist is one of the finest ones too. I use a lot of Economist articles. And I think you have an article in this assignment where an article comes from the Economist, very highly regarded. USA Today. These are the 4 or 5 main international press and media that are very well regarded. If something comes out from them, it's quite reliable. Now, how about your national newspapers? How are they?
There is a perception that they are politically linked to specific political parties. So even if that is not true, there is the public perception of that here in Jamaica.
Great. And I'm glad you guys know that things, so they have a particular tendency of for and against. Anybody else? Yeah?
Naren.
Yeah.
Just an issue with publications like The Economist and the Wall Street Journal that tend to have a built-in private sector neoliberal bias. I am hesitant to accept evidence certainly from a developing country perspective, to accept evidence from them without trying to look behind what are their editorial interests and bias.
Great question, Andre. Totally 100% agree with you in a sense that each of these, The Economist, USA Today, Wall Street, they have their editorial policy. Absolutely. And we had mentioned that already in our previous slides. Look into the editorial policy. The Economist, for example, has a pro-free marketeer, pro-private sector. We know that, right? Take it as face value, right? We know those things.
Sometimes, forgive me for being, if it's unpleasant, but sometimes I think they also have a racial bias.
All right, I won't go into that one now. Let's park that question about racial bias for the time being. Let's come to the substantive issues here. I totally agree, Andre. They may be perceived as racially biased or don't know the local situation. 100% agree. But in terms of knowing their editorial policy, in terms of free marketeers, private sector, it by face value. However, the credibility of such sources is internationally well recognized. Their writing skills, their data, their, how they demonstrate, it's very convincing. I 100% disagree with the Economist editorial board. Like 100% I disagree. However, every week I read that magazine because I found that how they write is fantastic. How they argument, how they use evidence, how they use graphs and charts. It's fascinating, right? So use that. Even if you disagree, you can use them. You can say, okay, here's something that economists mentioned, but I totally disagree with them. That's fine. You don't have to agree with that, right? But I'm just showing you some of the international media and press that are well regarded, whether you accept or no. But we are talking about your national newspapers where the policy issues are debated at a country level. That's where you should be more focusing on. and you should know that which newspaper in your country has which kind of editorial policies. Yeah, Colin.
Yes, Aaron, thanks. You know, you raise such a critical point there, because that for me sometimes poses a challenge, and I know we will probably discuss it a bit later. When you totally disagree with an issue or topic, but the evidence that is presented, comes from credible sources, and and persons utilize that evidence really to bolster their position. And of course, if someone is trying to prove a particular hypothesis, they will go after the evidence to support that, even if you don't agree with it. So, in terms of, and I mean, I know we'll get to that discussion. That to me is a critical point of discourse and interrogation for me as we go through these modules. Yeah.
Absolutely, I agree with you, Colin, in a sense that remember those paragraph, the statement A and statement B. What is evidence? A forceful advocate can make you believe things that even are not correct. It can be politicized. My statistics are facts, and your facts are just a statistic, right? So it's a way of presenting things. And that's the beauty about policy making. Policy making is out there on the public. Let's be ready to have criticism. If you can criticize somebody, so you have to be ready to be criticized. That's the premise, because policy making is politics. So let's confront it, right? So now we are, showing you how you should sharpen your arguments using some of the tools and instruments that we'll be giving, and in terms of how you'll question the evidence of your opponents you may not agree to. All right, Colin, we'll be coming to your questions. Beautiful. So I'll give you another set of institutions. For example, the top Ivy universities in the world. The best is Harvard, the MIT, Stanford, Oxford, Cambridge. Anything coming from these universities, you'll take it. It's great. It's fantastic. How about your national universities? How are they regarded? I know when University of the West Indies is fantastic. The campus in Jamaica, in Trinidad, I've been there. I know some of the professors, great, Andrew Downs, Patrick Watson, great guys, I love them, There was this Prem Ralph Das, I used to work with them. So very highly regarded university scholars. I'm sure in other countries, you know your national universities and the academics, they are there, they have very high considerations. There's another set of then foundations or NGOs like the Carnegie Endowment Fund that was created, the Chatham House, the Asian Development Bank Institute, which is based in Tokyo, Transparency International, the IDS, the International Development Studies Center, IFRI, which is a French International Relations Institute, RAND Corporation. These are some of the think tanks which are quite serious, although they have particular bias in their own, how could I say, in their own policies. In order to, have much more ammunitions and get more tools, have a look into some of the common, how would you appraise the common evidence products that you'll come across. It is put onto the eCampus where it is mentioned under the reading materials. So have a look into that. Now, that was the first category of the source and credibility. The second parameter, or the second factor in terms of appraising evidence, is the quality of that evidence. For this, you have to ask more questions, right? How was the information gathered? How was it gathered? What was the population sample? What was the methodology? Normally, if you have a report, for example, it comes out with some numbers, unemployment numbers, or forced labor or child labor. Normally, there's a methodology section. So try to look into that methodology section to see when was the data gathered? Was it a systematic process of gathering the information? We will do an exercise later on with the Economist newspaper article, and we'll go through bit by bit to show you how they put their arguments. All right. So was the information gathered in a systematic way? The source of evidence, again, you have to look into the source of evidence. Does it really solely one type of evidence? Is it just statistics, or it just research, or it's good practices? Whatever it is. So what type of evidence is used? Remember, we're talking about the 4 types of evidence that we had covered. Is it a mixture of qualitative or quantitative? In our discussion last time, quite a few of you have mentioned that the exercise that we had given to you, about I think the unemployment puzzle. You said you tend to use quantitative data, right? But the correct answer would be both qualitative and quantitative and qualitative, because you can't really rely on the quantitative, right? How about if the sample size was very small, or if the data was outdated? So the qualitative element really helps you having a more inclusive and broader picture rather than just a quantitative element, right? Any types of evidence which is missing, or citizens' knowledge we were talking about, is it missing? Is it some areas or geographical limitations are there? So you have to understand the sources of evidence that the evidence products are using. The other element you have to ask is, are the claims in line with the evidence presented? At times, you'll find that although the evidence is something else, the narrative is something else. And very often we find this kind of analytical work. For example, World Bank and IMF have fantastic research. At times the data that shows is totally different of what the policy recommendations are. So they may be totally disconnected. Or ILO in that case, at times it could be. ILO is one of the, I'm also criticizing my organization, one of the policy recommendations of ILO, no matter what it is, in any publication you open and have a look, one of the policy recommendation you will never miss is which one? Can you tell me which policy will always be there in ILO's policy recommendations? Let me see.
Is it social dialogue?
Yeah, absolutely, Dedra. Anything you'll do in ILO's publication, you have to build the social dialogue mechanisms for having whatever policy on child labor, on minimum wage, on occupational safety and health, on skills, on discrimination. There's always one policy which is enhance and build social dialogue mechanism. Whether that has been presented into that particular publication, no, that's another issue, okay? So that particular element is always there.
We already have a few answers in, well, actually one answer in in the chat that is decent work from Yossina.
Yeah, decent work is a much more broader, but the answer was what Dedra mentioned was what social dialogue. That
And
was
then
the answer.
Colin, you also say tripartite, just to
Absolutely.
mention some other labor rights. I mean, that's the
Yeah, not so much labor rights, not so much on the rights base, but more on the social dialogue. Essential, as I said, that's the DNA of ILO. That's how it has been built. The social dialogue always there. Good research can make reasonable claims, you know. And if you get evidence, has that information been reviewed? Has there been any feedback provided? For example, if you manage to get a book, is anybody saying something about the book? Or a paper that was published, has somebody commented on that? What are the critics saying? What are the peers saying? Is it of high quality or no? You'll judge it by looking into a review of, for example, a publication that you managed to find. The other question is, what was the time, right? When was that evidence produced? Is it clear when the information was gathered? We mentioned that already, when was produced. You know, there was a very good example. I can tell you that in India, during the COVID pandemic, the government did there was a income and household survey of wages and labor and all issues regarding labor force surveys, right? and the result was shown that unemployment was decreasing, like we saw in Philippines, like we saw in Trinidad and Tobago, that unemployment has been really decreasing. And so the people said, hey, wait a minute, in the COVID pandemic, the government is claiming that unemployment is decreasing. That means there's more work available during the COVID pandemic. Then when they looked into the household surveys, the labor force surveys, in fact, the data that was used was 2018, 2019, just before the COVID pandemic, right? And so the government was using that to say, oh, we are doing a fantastic job. Even during COVID pandemic, unemployment is decreasing in India. So you have to know, when was the data gathered? Is it obsolete or no? We can also do another kind of quality control if that particular piece of evidence has been cited by other people. We mentioned that you can just do a Google search and you'll find whether that particular evidence has been cited by other peers, those who work with that particular topic, right? Once again, in order to appraise non-scientific information, there's a checklist that we have provided with you on the eCampus platform. Have a look. Now, let's do a group activity here, okay? By just looking into one abstract of a journal article, you should be able to find out the quality of that paper, whether you would want to read it or no. So here's something that I have just copied and pasted the abstract from one of the articles which was published in the International Labor Review in 2023. I would want us to do it together in terms of whether that particular information is of good quality or no. For example, what is the methodology? What is the range of sources? What is the timeliness? What are the conclusions and claims made by that, right? We will answer this question step by step. So who wants to read this text? Anybody, please? One paragraph.
Sure, Naren. I'll go.
Colin.
All right. So contrary to the expectation that only ratifying states comply with the ILO conventions, this article argues that even non-ratifying states improve their domestic standards consistent with ILO conventions to enhance their legitimacy. Using a new historical database, I tracked changes in maternity leave provisions in 160 countries between 1883 and 2018 in the light of the International Labour Conference's adoption of the Maternity Protection Conventions. The empirical findings, confirmed that both non-ratifying and ratifying states expanded the terms and conditions of their paid maternity leave policies shortly thereafter.
Beautiful. Thank you, Colin. Now, so who can tell me where was it published?
(2023).
Yeah, in the International Labor Review, okay?
Where, sorry.
Yeah. And who is the author?
Keoni-san.
Yeah, Keoni-san, right?
Yeah.
So you can do a Google search and see who's that person, right? Now the question is, what is the methodology of this article? Who can tell me? How was that done?
From historical data, they have collected and then they compared and then they analyze the trends between.
Lovely. That was the question, Nareshma. It's a historical database, right? Yes. What are the range of sources from?
1883 to 2018.
Lovely. And looking into the maternity leave provisions in how many countries?
160.
Lovely. Right. So and the time is 1883 to 2018. What are the claims made? What is the conclusions?
That non-ratifying and ratifying states expanded the terms. That is what, over the period, that is what the claim is.
Lovely. So what we see is this article argues that even non-ratifying states improve their domestic standards, consistent with the ILO Conventions of Maternity Protection. Or does it give you some, if you're working on maternity protection, suppose, right? Do you feel looking into this article deeper? Do you feel? Yeah. Would you feel, right? It looks serious enough, all right? That's how we wanted to show, just by looking at the abstract, whether you want to go inside or no. And if you'll do a search on who is the author, I think the author's name is also here. She's based in, I think, where is she based? In Denmark, with quite an important institution. But also it mentioned that this research is based on a project that she was funded by. So she has acknowledged how this research was done. So everything's out there, ethically correct. So if you want to look into the article, you can have a look, and it's a fascinating article. And the International Labour Review, it's one of the oldest reviews on labor issues, starting from 1921. It started by ILO, right? It's published 3 times a year, still going on, and it's one of the top-ranking international journals on labor issues. All right, it's published by Wiley, and of course it's ILO, who our research department coordinates that. So that's why I wanted to bring this article. And in order to get published in this journal, there's a waiting time of at least 3 years. Okay, it takes a long time before you get it published, and it's very, very reputable journal. So just by looking at the abstract, you can already know the quality of the particular piece of evidence, whether you want to use it or not. Any questions? Sarah, you seem to have a question.
Go ahead, Sarah.
I was thinking, how do we take into account, in terms of timeliness, how do we take into account and reconcile the fact that many peer-reviewed publications, as you said, in reputable journals like this, take at least 2 to 3 years for the entire process and to be published. And of course, when I start the process, my data, regardless if it's an historical research or not, my data is at least 1 year prior I started the process of publication. So we tend to favor peer-reviewed publications, but the reality is there is some sort of mismatch when we think about the timeliness of 1 to 3 years time frame. So can you speak about that?
Absolutely right on the spot, Sarah, in terms of one of the downsides of good journal is that because of the waiting time, quality control, right? Peer review, blind, double, this and that, it takes a lot of time. And there's a backlog from the previous submissions that were made. It takes 3 years to publish, and the data is here. The last data is 2018, right? So it gives the 3 year, it was published in 2023, right? It tells you, but nothing much has changed. I mean, the data go back really 1883, right? So the trend is there. Unless you are looking for some kind of headline figures, which changes every now and then, unemployment, economic growth, these things keeps on changing from quarter to quarter. And that one, you can't rely on academic journals to say this is the economic growth. But here we're looking at the trend. The trend, it's a historical trend. And even if something was done in 2020 or 2023, nothing much will change because it's a general trend that the author is talking about. But I take your point for specific annual economic growth, unemployment figures. If you are looking into those elements, you look into the government statistics, not into peer-reviewed journals. So that's out of question. However, in order to understand the dynamics behind that and get some information of how things evolve, then you might want to look into the peer-reviewed journals, but not just for specific reasons. Thanks, Sarah. Rokas, yeah, you had a question?
Yeah, this might be a silly question, but I'm curious, why does it, about the time frame? It says it starts from 1883 to 2018, but the ILO starts at 1919. Why does it start so early?
Anybody wants to answer that? Yeah, good question. Yeah, anybody wants to answer? Well, the maternity protection issues had been already discussed well before ILO was established, right? It was 1919, but all this maternity protection started well before in other countries, especially maybe in the Nordic countries. I don't know if to look into the articles and try to understand the reasoning behind, but my perception is that all these issues had been already started well before ILO was established. And then they look into the conventions where in 1919, the first maternity convention was adopted, the C3, what we call in 1919, and onwards in the 1950s. Again, there were many other conventions adopted on maternity protection. But to answer your question, I think the author tries to track the trend over the years, historical trends. So well before ILO. And if you're really interested, please have a look into the article. Thanks, Rokas. All right. Let's move on. The second or the third element about the appraising the evidence is whether that particular piece of information that you gathered is relevant to your policy question or no. And how would you determine whether it's relevant to your policy questions? And here are some of the questions you may ask. How is the evidence connected to your evidence need and the type of questions you are answering? How is it related? We will do one exercise in a short while. So this is one question. How is it connected to your policy question? Are there any specific geographic limitations? If you are working in Trinidad and if you got something from Belarusi, how would you compare and contrast it? Or if you're looking in Trinidad and you find something from Jamaica, maybe it's similar economies. Or are you looking into the urban areas or rural areas, or where the ethnic minorities live, or in the mountains or not mountains, you know? So it depends on your policy question. What are you looking into? Is the evidence from another context that the one you're looking for? We just mentioned maybe from other countries or other context where there was a war, for example, that is not suitable to you, or there was an economic crisis and what happened later on, and policies have changed over time. Are you seeking evidence about the specific period of time, or something you want to look what happened to youth unemployment after the COVID pandemic, and that's after 2020? Or if something you find before 2020, it may not be relevant to you, to your policy question. The other element, does the evidence address the complexity of the issue? Policies are complex. So does it answer those questions or no? So those are some of the questions that you need to ask about the relevance. So here's one example I will give how you will have to answer these questions. Suppose that you are looking to find out how to extend social protection to female informal sector workers in Philippines. Right, Dulce? You may not find the information on this exact topic, suppose, right? On informal sector, female informal sector workers in Philippines. You will find something, for example, best practice in reducing informality in India from ILO publications or from ADB, where social protection is only one component and not focused on Philippines. Maybe it's on a few other countries, right? You'll find survey results from trade unions on the number of informal sector workers in Jamaica, but the data is not disaggregated. So it's men and female, right? So you don't have the number for the female. Other studies looking at universal pension coverage in Morocco, for example, which includes informal sector workers, and universal healthcare coverage from Thailand, suppose. You find those in pieces of information, right? You may find exactly the same thing and answering your policy question and target population, but it is from Iran. Right, Tara? It's from Iran. My question to you, what would you do? You are looking on how to extend social protection to female informal sector workers in Philippines. And these are some of the things you get, right? While doing your research. What would you do?
Can I
probably assemble the them into a coherent or probably combine the diverse resources so that you could somehow combine all the information and relate it into the topic.
Beautiful. Thank you, Dilsen. Right? Combine. Anybody else?
We have
Maybe
also,
take
a couple of comments in the chat. One is do a comparative analysis from Narendra. And then Sadika says, examine these and pick out the solutions and recommendations, and then see whether they are adaptable to your situation.
And also we can study it whichever is relevant to Philippines. I mean, if I am from Philippines, I'll see which is relevant, either it is India or Jamaica, or, you know, similar conditions, similar working environment. Maybe that could, I may correlate.
Absolutely. I think you have all answered the things that I wanted to hear was combined, as Dulce mentioned. Try to combine all those pieces of information to have a coherent story for Philippines. Not everything, whichever is relevant, as the narration mentioned, right? So that's what you do in the real life. That's exactly what we'll get. So it's like a jigsaw puzzle approach where you try to fit in what's required, and that's how you judge the relevance, right? The last component I want to talk about in terms of objective and subjective, the key consideration is the following. First one is on the information that has been presented to you. Is the evidence base clearly described, and are gaps of incomplete data acknowledged? Is it relevant to the question that you are asking? Is there enough evidence, right? All the information presented from a position of interest, we all recognize that our own personal belief may be included in these objective subjectivity issues. The other element is on the perspectives. Do the authors state clearly their own viewpoint? I was talking about ILO, IMF, or any NGOs. Do they situate themselves within the current debates of the topic? That's extremely important. Are different or competing viewpoints identified and addressed, right? Remember, we're talking that you may not agree with certain points, but it is acknowledged. That's the most important part, that it should be acknowledged, even if you don't agree. Okay, you just acknowledge you don't agree for whatever reason. The sponsorship. Research may be sponsored by an industry or by a government, right? This does not necessarily make the research less objective, but it may make interpretation selective, right? Remember, in the previous article we saw that the author had mentioned that this publication is based on a research project. Whoever had funded it, you may want to have a look, right? So it's acknowledged how that evidence was produced. And the language. Look out for the language that is either convoluted or vague. Assess the significance of the key concepts on the one hand, on the other hand, right? So language is vague, and they are not saying that we have got the solution, right? They're not talking about that. So these are the 4 elements that I wanted to mention. Just the last exercise in terms of whether something is objective or subjective, right? Anybody who knows about this publication, Doing Business by the World Bank? Are you aware of this publication?
Yes.
You are, huh? It was called the Doing Business Index, right? Coming from the World Bank. Have you heard about anything?
Well, it was discontinued due to issues around the credibility of the data and some other things, yeah.
Lovely. Great. That's the thing I wanted to show it to here. Even coming from a very reputable organization like the World Bank. This publication was, I think, started in 2000 or 2001. It was like an institution, the ease of doing business, right? So each country wanted to be above the other, basically, in terms of ranking, right? And to the point where some of the countries were forcing, lobbying the World Bank to put their rankings higher. and some of China, India were involved. Other bigger countries were lobbying, and later on we found out that all these things was quite manipulated. And as you mentioned, I think Dedra, that this publication was discontinued. They stopped it. They excused, and then they are coming up with the new publication called Business Ready. Be Ready, and it will be coming out, I think, in September 2024 this year. A new publication with new methodology, new indicators. But it was a big scandal, this thing, even from the World Bank, right? So again, you have to take it with a pinch of salt. Now, let's do an exercise. I want you to read these two statements and tell me which one is objective, which one is subjective. Bhavika? Is it a poll, this one? Right. So let's start with the first one. Who wants to read the first one, the quote A? Anybody wants to read the quote A?
Yes, as South Africa battles its worst economic crisis in 70 years, the jobless rate climbed, shocking massive social and political concerns.
So is it objective or subjective?
Subjective.
It looks subjective.
Subjective.
Why would you say it's subjective?
Because there is
Because
no
there
place
is no data.
from where they are quoting this. How they, which source is not mentioned.
Right. Most of you say it's very subjective. How about the second quote B? Who wants to read that? Anybody else?
All right, I'll go.
Dedra.
South Africa lost well over 300,000 of its workforce in 2022 to overseas employment, the worst for any year on record. The country has also cut its recurrent budget spending by 6% in 2023 to manage its finances.
What do you think? Is it objective or subjective?
Objective.
Objective. More objective.
More objective, absolutely. I mean, that's what we wanted to hear. It's more objective. Somebody said it's both objective and subjective. Maybe not. The first one seems like mostly it's subjective. The second quote is the numbers here and there. There's no positions taken, just gives the facts, the numbers. It's much more objective. Great. Thank you for that. All right. Now, so basically, if we sum up what we have looked, combining the different viewpoints or perspective is the best way to provide the most balanced picture, right? Even as I said, you disagree with them, you mention it, that here's something evidence, you disagree. Or if it's from other countries, you may acknowledge, but you say, with changes in this context, it can be applied. The more perspectives are included, the more objective the understanding of the topic should be, right? And if you fail to account for different viewpoints, you run the risk of providing a biased answer to your own policy or research question here, okay? So basically, you have to take different perspectives, even when you are proposing specific policy recommendations. Even the ones that your opponents are talking about, you can mention about them, and you can say why it's not practical. It cannot be applied. Now, in terms of summing up what we have discussed, what you have to remember for your own policy question, how do you know if a source of information is of good quality? You should have the tools that I have gave you in terms of source, objective, quality, and relevance. And if you want to check the credibility, we have looked into the different components of the authors and the sponsoring institutions and the evidence product that we have discussed about. More information is available in the documentation provided in the eCampus. What we will do, we will have a pause here. Is that okay, Vincenzo, or can we do a breakout room and then we do the pause?
Maybe I will go first for the pause because it's 3:15 now, Central European time zone. So maybe I think it's better to have a pause now. Maybe we can have a a shorter post, just 5 minutes, 6 minutes, and then go ahead with the breakouts. What do you think?
Right. Okay. What we'll do, let's pause here. And if you have any questions about those 4 specific things, right? I'd be happy to answer that. And then we'll have a pause for maybe 5, 10 minutes, whichever you decide. And then I have a breakout room activity where you will be critically examining the evidence that is provided to you. Any questions?
No questions from the floor so far.
All right. Any comments? All right. So shall we have a pause here? Vincenzo, you decide
Sure.
how long you want, and then when we come back, we will do our group exercise. Vincenzo? Yeah, welcome back. Our colleagues from Asia are still awake, so we have some confidence that we are okay. Gloria, Dulce, you still there? Okay, great. And Yasina, she there? Indonesia? Maybe not. All right. Okay, and our friends from the Caribbeans are there. All right, great. It was a quick Hosina is there. Great, good to see you. Right. It was a quick summary of some of the questions you may ask in order to judge the quality, the relevance, the credibility of the evidence that you got. So we looked into those 4 things. Remember, source and credibility, the relevance, the quality, and whether it's subjective or objective. That's what we went through, right? Any questions? You had some time to think about that? All right. No questions. Abhavika, you want to take the explanation of the breakout group, or shall I do that?
However you prefer, Naren, either is good.
Yeah, I
If
think
you
I
are
think
sharing the screen,
I have been talking a lot.
sure. I'll take over. Yes. Thank you. Thanks, Naren. All right. So welcome back, everyone. And right now, we are going to have a similar exercise as we did on Monday. It's going to be 4 breakout rooms, and there are going to be separate questions for you all to answer. This time, all the 4 groups will have 4 different case studies to answer to, no repetition. So some questions for you. You see that there is case C and case D, and we'll quickly go through case A. You will find that that one is particularly focused on the source and credibility. Since you do not know at the moment which group you are going to be a part of, so please go ahead and take a screenshot of this particular slide. For case B, it's going to be objectivity versus bias. On the next slide, you will see case C, which is on quality and timeliness. As we were discussing before, we had many interesting questions on timeliness and how to assess that. And lastly, on 4th, which is the relevance. And again, request you to take a screenshot of this as well. Now on the next slide, we have set out the instructions. This time, you will have to work in your group and try to come up with at least 6 set of questions on how the evidence for each should be critically assessed, particularly on the topic that I had just shared. All the 4 groups are going to have 4 different parameters to assess the evidence on. As for the breakout room, we'll see if it's if 10 minutes are enough, because it's just it's a set of only 6 questions that you'll have to come up with. So hopefully 10 minutes should be good enough. And let's keep 10 minutes. And once you have had that discussion, we'll also be there, Nareen and I, and other team members of ours who will be in the meeting to guide you if you get stuck anywhere. After that, we'll come back in the meeting and hopefully we'll follow the same format. One person from every group could be nominated or could volunteer to share the answers with the whole group. Having said that, good luck. Hope you all have had your screenshots in place. If not, then we can share them again. You can unmute yourself or share the request on the chat. We'll be happy to go back. Otherwise, Vincent. Okay, sure. Let's go back. We'll stay
Is
for
it
5 seconds.
possible? Is it possible to post it in the chat? I think even when we go to breakout rooms, we will be able to see it. I think it's gonna be easier.
Okay.
Yeah, also
we're
going to broadcast a message to all the rooms. Maybe we can also do that. So broadcasting a message in the rooms. But in any case, yes, I will suggest first to post in the chat and then you will see a reminder.
Oh, Celia did.
Yeah, she did. Yes.
Okay, indeed.
Okay, perfect. All right then.
One more thing, if you have not taken the questions that we had mentioned for each of those slides, I can show you again the questions if you are interested. For each of those 4 rubric, I'll go very quickly. So let's start here. Where were we? There you go. So for example, on the factors about authors, these are the questions you have to ask. Yeah, and sponsoring institutions, questions to ask. Publications, here's the questions, right? So this was on the first one, on the source and credibility. This is again another topic that we looked into. The quality, the second question on quality. So these are the questions. Okay. You may want to just take a snapshot, and then these will be the questions that you will have to ask for your question on quality. And then was on relevance. So these are the questions that we were asking. Take a snapshot. So this is the question that you'll rephrase it for each of those questions that will be asked. And the last one was the 4 components of the subjective and objective: information, perspective, sponsorship, and language. Right? So there you go. And there we are. Bhavika, Vincenzo, please go ahead.
Yeah, all rooms should be open now.
Bhavika, take over. Yeah.
Sure. All right. So, hope you all had enough time to come up with the 6 questions. Let's quickly dive in. And even if it's not 6, maybe 4, however many questions you could prepare, come up with, let's hear those. So, let's start with the first group for case study A. Look forward to hearing your insights and the questions that you have come up with. So, over to you now.
So group 1 was Celia, Colin, Dedra, Donald, Narasimha, Narendra, Sheldon. And yeah, that's all. So who is the spokesperson in charge?
I was nominated.
Okay. Please go ahead.
So we looked at case A, and our focus was on source and credibility. So we didn't complete our discussions, but we came up with about 4 questions, and I added a 5th. So the first question we came up with is, are there experts on youth unemployment, as that was our focus, that have published on this topic or issue? Our second question was, does the author or the organization which the author represents have a strong perspective or history on the subject matter, that is youth unemployment? Third question, and we're assuming that it is sponsored. So we would then ask who is sponsoring and what is their vested interest with them sponsoring. Fourth, how long has the organization existed? And I've added, what is the editorial policy of the organization in this instance? So we didn't get to come up with a sixth, but I guess we could also look at how often has this author been cited from previous works and so on. So if the group members, anyone has anything to add, but those are our questions.
Thanks, Deirdre. I think that was brilliant. You have covered all the points. But yes, again, if there could be 3 to 4 more questions on the same, and you already know because there was limited time, we understand that you couldn't come up with all of those. But the questions that you have come up with are absolutely right. The factors that we had just discussed earlier in the session today, you have tried to touch upon those. So I think that's brilliant. Let's hear from group 2 now.
Yeah. So in group 2, there were Christine, Christoph, Shane, Yosina, and well, I don't know who is going to be the spokesperson. So
Okay, so I'll go because Naren appointed me as leader. But we didn't get to do much of a group discussion, but based on the slides that we had from the lecture, just some generic questions we have. What are the vested interests within the evidence product base? On who sponsors them? Then does the author clearly state their viewpoints on universal social protections? Because they may come with some, they may have a certain paradigm that may determine like how they interpret evidence. And is evidence base clearly defined, which shows like methodology and any embedded but potentially embedded biases. That's as far as I got with that case.
Okay, that's great progress too. I'm sure with more time, you would have got together more questions. Naren, since you were in the group, any comments?
No, I think there was not too many discussions there, but I think Christoph took it from there. Great, well done, Christoph. I like your team spirit there.
Well, thank you. You incentivized me. So
great.
Okay, great. Moving ahead to group 3.
So group 3, we still have there was Clara, Dina, Dulce, Rokash, and Sadika.
Okay, yeah, I'll go ahead since we didn't get a chance to nominate anyone. So with our presentation, we had to look at quality and timeliness with regard to looking for information on how to ratify ILO OSH conventions for our country. And we had to reach out to our network for useful sources and relevant literature. So in terms of timeliness, one question that we would have wanted to ask was how up to date is this info? And also whether that the sources that we've been recommended, if they have taken into consideration any amendments that would have been occurred with regard to the convention. So those are 2 things with regard to timeliness. In terms of quality, we would have wanted to know whether or not the sources that we would have been recommended were in terms of when it came from organizations, whether these were publicly funded or whether there were vested interests. And in other cases where other experts were used, how credible are they in terms of their background? We also wanted to take a look at, in terms of the sources that were recommended to us, we also wanted to ask, are there any missing evidence that we need to pay attention to? In fact, have we just been fed a particular set of evidence products, and is there something else that we need to be paying attention to? And then a final one that I was just thinking about here was that whether or not the evidence products that have been recommended to us, whether it's a mix of quantitative and qualitative data. So that's what we managed to come up with.
Wow, great job. I think you are right on point. 6 questions, is that so? Or more than 6?
Nah, that was 6. Yeah.
6, exact 6. Wow, okay. Great job. A pat on your back for all of the team members in group 3. Great job. I think you've touched upon all the points for the quality questions that we had presented before. So bang on, absolutely correct. Great work there. Lastly, we have group 4. So let's hear from them. Any volunteers?
It
Sure,
was
Sarah,
me.
go ahead.
So we had to assess relevance, and we were looking for information on best practices on reducing discrimination at the workplace. We interrupted our conversation, but we came up with a few questions. So the first one, going back to this idea of timeliness, we were looking at how recent is the research data, but also the best practices covered. Because since we didn't have any indication in terms of, maybe looking at an historical time frame or historical time frame, then it was relevant for us to look at best practices that were more recent versus older best practices. In terms of the general topic, a few questions that we came up with were, does the source of information present enough evidence on discrimination in the workplace? So more general. And then the other one, does it provide actionable insights or merely general information about reducing discrimination in the workplace? And then we also, in terms of assessing the best practices itself, we came up with, does the indicators used in the best practices are in line with our policy interest in this case? And then we started touching on, we don't really have a question, but touching on geographic locations limitations. So if these best practices were nationally related or locally related, where they were coming from, etc.
That's great. I think you've covered most of the points that are to be covered for finding relevance and critically assessing whether the evidence you have come across is that relevant to your policy question or not. And yes, the last point, as you were saying, if whether the evidence that you have come across has its own geographical limitations or can it be generalized. I think that's all great. I think great job. Everybody has put together the right questions as you were expecting. Over to you, Naren.
Beautiful. Thank you, Bhavika, and thank you, guys. You did a fantastic job in basically wrapping up our session here and bringing out the questions that need to be posed to judge the relevance, the quality, the objective, subjective, and whether the authors are credible or no. I think fantastic, well done. But maybe just go back to those questions, and when you deal with your policy questions, ask those questions again. You will be able to come up with the answers, whether you want to use those evidence or no. So thank you very much. Just to sum up what we have just covered, and to move to the next application session, I just wanted to share my slide in terms of what is next for you. Just give me 1 second, and there you go. So yeah, I could explain what needs to be done. For your assignment, we have given an example from a newspaper article from The Economist, why people are always so gloomy about the world of work. From 2021, there are 3 questions that we have asked you. What are the main labor market and employment topics discussed in that article? How would you appraise that article, the things that we have just gone through in terms of source and credibility, quality, and objective or subjectivity? And of course, do you agree that today's world of work is far better than its critics would have liked to admit? You may want to explain. So that's on the eCampus platform. And the second assignment, which is linked to your policy question, where we have put a worksheet for you, where you will have to put some of the evidence that you have found based on the previous session, and then you want to look into its strengths, whether you'll use it or no for your policy briefs. So there are two small exercises as your assignment for this module. Please do so, and we'll be looking into those things. Thank you very much for your attention so far. Great engagement and enthusiasm. We look forward to taking you further. Now, if you may allow, if you have any questions, please do so, ask now, or you can put in the chat or in the discussion forum. We'd be happy to guide you from there on. Since now we are right on time, and my two colleagues, Frédéric Lepere and Florence Bonnet, are here with us, who will be taking you one step further of what we have just presented in terms of appraising evidence, and they will be taking the concept of informality or formalizing the informal sector, and what ILO is doing, and how would you appraise the evidence that is presented to you. So I have the pleasure of welcoming our director, who is leading our action program from transition from informality to formality, Frédéric Lepere. He's a great colleague, very well versed with ILO. He has been working for many years, an economist. In his previous role, he was the country director in Africa, in Côte d'Ivoire, where he was looking after 5 or 7 countries there. And also he's a real true expert on the issue of informal sector workers. He has published widely. And of course, his colleague Florence is a fantastic researcher, statistician, and a great colleague who will also be, I think, taking you a step further with Fred. Fred, the floor is yours. Thank you for being with us. I leave the floor to both Flo and Fred to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Naren. It's always a great pleasure to be with you and with all the participants to participate in that very important training program, and to discuss this afternoon on this issue of transition from the informal to the formal economy, which is at the heart of the policy agenda of many countries. So what we would like to do with you this afternoon is really to discuss the concept, some definition, to give some numbers about the nature, the characteristic of informal employment, and then to try to go with you through the solutions in terms of pathways for transition to formality. It's a key challenge, which is also a key concern for the workers, the employers, and the governments. And as you know, the ILO works since the early 70s on this issue of working conditions and sustainable enterprises in the informal sector, and then how we move out those economic units and those workers from the informal to the formal economy. So if we look at the most recent policy debates, we can see that all the policymakers, they see the issue of transition, the issue of the informal economy like a root cause of poverty, of inequality, of key structural obstacles for structural transformation, leading countries towards the digital revolution, towards inclusive growth. So that's why, this issue of transition to formality is part of the SDGs under Objective 8. It's also for this reason that it is also at the heart of this of the issues which are discussed in the Global Coalition for Social Justice that was put in place by the DG of the ILO with more and more members now. And it will be also a key issue that will be discussed for the Social Development Conference coming in 2025, because if we want to fight against inequality, if we want to fight against poverty, if we want to provide opportunities for the people to get out from poverty and to have the capability to have a decent life, it is very important to tackle and to the issue of informal economy and to try to find the pathways for transition to formality. And that's why what we would like to do, if it is a priority, you have to design effective policies, you have to monitor those policies because you will invest some resources, public resources. You will invest also a lot of energy to move out those people from informality and those economic units. And that's why it's so important to agree about what is the informal economy, what is informal employment, and what are the key characteristics in each country contexts of informal employment and the characteristic of economic units in the informal economy, so we can design effective policies and we can also promote transformative change. And that's why I will give the floor to my colleague Florence to start the presentation with all those issues linked to concepts, definitions, and key data we have on informality. Please, Florence.
Thank you, Fred. And yeah, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. So I will be the one who will go into definition. It's not the most easy, but it's a way to start and to be able to go into figures after numbers. So let's start with a few definitions about the informal economy. Just to say that the informal economy has been defined statistically only recently in 2023 at the ICLS 21st. ICLS is the International Conference of Labor Statisticians that took place in October last year. But until then, there were a kind of political definition or political use of informal economy that you can find in recommendation 204, for instance, the recommendation on the transition from the informal to the formal economy, saying that the informal economy are all economic activities by workers and economic units. You see here already the notion of workers and economic units, and we measure both, that are in law or in practice not covered or insufficiently covered by formal arrangements. And it does not cover illicit activities. Now, here you also see this notion of in law or in practice to say that it's not sufficient to be covered by law to be formal, but you have to have effective access to labor and social protection or be in compliance with obligation in effective terms to be considered formal. And just to say that in statistics, what we measure is this effective access to protection or effective compliance. It's not only legal. So this, since 2023, has been translated into statistical terms, and you can see that there is really a similarity. Statistically, informal economy are all productive activities carried out by persons or economic units that are in law or in practice not covered by formal arrangements. And this is the broader concept of informal economy. And within this informal economy, you have some boxes or components. You can see it as Russian dolls, if you want. First, you have informal employment, which is a sub-part of informal economy. And informal employment are activity of persons to produce goods and services for pay or profits. So it's not informal work, but informal employment. And again, that is in law and practice not covered by formal arrangements. And here we are thinking of commercial laws, income taxation, labor legislation, social protection, for instance. And just to understand that actually the statistical definition of informal employment varies depending on status in employment. When we say status in employment, you have a definition for employees. And for employees, we concretely look, for instance, at the fact that the employer contributes on behalf of the employer to Social Security. And doing so, we assume that you have the recognition of the employment relationship, you have all that goes with that, with the contribution to Social Security. For independent workers, that means employers and on-account workers, they will be in informal employment if the enterprise or economic unit is in the informal sector. And an enterprise is in the informal sector if it's not legally recognized, not distinct from the household members, and do not have any complete set of accounts aligned with the law that goes in the country. And finally, contributing family workers. It used to be informal by definition, but this changed in 2023 to recognize that some countries at least provide some protection to contributing family workers. So here again, contributing family workers will be in informal employment if they are not covered or recognized under the administrative framework in the country and do not have an effective access to protection. And again, the recommended criteria here is a contribution to social insurance scheme by contributing family workers. So just to say that, no, I don't see, yeah. So now, this is informal employment. Oh, you don't see the, it's not correct. Normally it should have come above the thing, but you see the green behind the blue, it should come, this is a mistake from my side, but you have the informal sector, which is actually all the independent workers. That means business owners. Informal sector is an enterprise-based concept. We define it based on the characteristic of the enterprise. That means not registered, not complete set of account. And you have employment in the informal sector that actually go beyond independent workers, but also include employees that are employed in those enterprises and some contributing family workers. Just to understand that you have employment in the informal sector, you have also informal employment in the formal sector or in household. In household, it will be domestic workers. In the formal sector, it could be typically undeclared workers. And in addition to that, you will have informal productive activities within formal jobs. And this where we come to the informal economy at large. So that means unpaid wages, for undeclared wages, undeclared hours within a formal job. Just to say that for the time being, we measure quite well informal employment, also informal sector, not yet the informal economy at large, but we are improving. So now moving to numbers based on this definition. So we will go through numbers through 4 questions. The first question being what is the extent of the informal economy? Second and third question, who are the workers that are in the informal economy, or what type of economic units can you find in the informal sector? And the third one, who are the most exposed to informality? That means different incidents of informality for different groups. And the fourth question is about working condition in the informal economy, but also the formal economy. Just to say that being formal is not necessarily being decent as a job. So part of the policy and intervention is also to ensure that formal jobs are decent jobs. So moving to the first question, what is the extent of informality? Globally, there are 2 billion workers in the informal economy. This means that the majority of workers in employment in the world have informal jobs. 60% of all workers are in informal employment. This reached 90% in developing countries, low-income countries, close to 2/3 in emerging countries, and not far from 20% in high-income countries. So that means that informality, you can find informality everywhere, but still you can see that you have a link between the incidence of informal employment and the level of development. If we look by region, so you can find here the 6 out of 10 workers globally in informal employment, the 58%. It's the highest in Africa, 84%, the lowest in Europe and Central Asia, 19.7%, so lower but still there. And you can see again that informal employment can be found in the informal sector. This is actually where you find the majority of those with informal jobs. That means in informal sector enterprises, more than 80% of informal workers are in informal sector enterprises. You have a few in formal sector, basically undeclared work, and this proportion is higher in high-income countries in particular. And finally, you have a range of informal workers in households, typically domestic workers, but also in those statistics, subsistence farmers will be found here. And this is particularly high in Africa or low-income countries in general. So yeah, just a word about the gender differences. You can see that on a global basis, at least women are less exposed to informality than men. 55% of all women in employment are informal compared to 60% of men. And this is influenced by big countries like China and Russia, where men are more exposed to informality than women. But just to say that actually in more than 55% of all countries worldwide, women are more exposed than men to informality. So it's more a structural effect as well. So moving to the second and third question, so who are the workers the most represented in informal employment and who are the most exposed to the risk of informality? It will become more obvious what is the distinction between the two questions looking at figures. So here, for instance, it's who are the most exposed. It's looking at exposure to informality or the incidence of informal employment depending on age. And you can see that the youth and older workers are the most exposed to informality. This U shape that you can see in the world and in all regions, you can see almost in all countries in the world. On the right side, you can see by countries, your country, at least those with some data where you see also this U shape. It's typical in Namibia where it's super visible. So that means that, yeah, informality tends to decrease when you become older and it increases again after legal retirement age in particular. Now moving to education, informality and level of education. So it's clear that education, it's already part of the drivers of informality, at least those drivers attached to the characteristic of workers that can make it more complicated or difficult for them to access formal employment. Alors, the first graph is about exposure again. We are looking at the share of informal employment depending on the level of education. You can see that up to 94% of those with no education have an informal employment, and this decreased to 1/4 for those with a tertiary level. So having a high level of education is not a guarantee to access formal employment, but at least it's a good factor that can enhance the access to formal jobs. Another way to look at education and informality is to look at the distribution of informal employment and formal employment by level of education. So you can see here the the educational profile of workers in informal employment. You can see that the vast majority, at least the largest group, 45%, have at best the first primary level of education. So that means that the informal economy tends to absorb people with low level of education. This is particularly true in low-income countries, not so true in high-income countries. And you can see the difference with workers in formal employment, where less than 10% have either low or primary level of education and 1/3 a tertiary level. And as I said, when you look at high-income countries, well, their secondary and tertiary level is the norm, and you can see that up to 1/3 of those in informal employment have indeed a tertiary level of education. So moving now not to personal characteristics, but more employment-related features. Here is the exposure to informal employment depending on status in employment. That means employees, employers, on-the-ground workers, and contributing family workers. It's based on the previous definition of informal employment. Contributing family workers on the right side are all in informal employment by definition. But apart from contributing family workers, the most exposed to informality are on-account workers. So that means independent workers without employees. 87% are in informal employment. And you see that employees, at least 4 out of 10, are also in informal employment. It's the lowest rate, but still some are exposed to informality, and some more than others. Here we focus only on employees, and we are looking at employees in so-called non-standard forms of employment, or now called insecure forms of employment. And you can see that even within the group of employees, when you look at temporary employees, for instance, 70% are in informal employment. So that means that you can also be highly exposed to the risk of informality. Still on status in employment, but this time moving from exposure to composition. And again, comparing the distribution by status in employment of those in informal employment compared to those in formal employment. So starting with the world situation, you can see that the largest group in numbers and in proportion are on-account workers. When you look at all workers in informal employment, 47% are on-account workers and 16% contributing family workers. Maybe I should have followed what was discussed before, but those two stages are particularly vulnerable. We also call vulnerable employment. And it appears that they are also the most difficult to reach and to formalize when we are on formalization policies. So employees represent 35% of all workers in informal employment, and this proportion tends to become bigger with the increase in the level of income. So that means that it represents the majority of those in informal employment in high-income countries. So when you look at status, you can already start looking at what forms of informal employment prevail in different income group of countries. So in low-income group of countries, over 80% of total informal employment is composed of contributing family workers and on-account workers. It's not on this graph, but just to say that more than 90% of informal jobs are in informal sector enterprises. And agriculture represents 68% of informal jobs in low-income countries. When we look at middle-income countries, their informal employment is still dominated by independent workers. But now my employees start to represent quite a sizable size of informal jobs. And we see a lower share of agriculture, less than 40%, and services start to occupy quite a large share of informal jobs. Now, high-income countries, undeclared employees in informal employment is an important manifestation and represents the majority of informal jobs, more than 60%. And self-employment will represent 1/4 of informal jobs, but you have there quite a number, a significant proportion of disguised self-employed. So that means those that where potentially an employment relationship should be recognized, but is not. Continuing with employment-related features, the sectoral dimension, and here it's a worldwide situation, looking at the main sectors and the exposure to informality. Although it's a worldwide situation, it's more or less what we can find in most regions and in most countries. The most exposed to the risk of informality are really those in agriculture, where you have on a worldwide basis more than 90% that are in informal employment. This is followed by domestic workers working in households, construction, other service activities, accommodation and food services, and then wholesale and retail trade. So those sectors come almost systematically on the top of those exposed to informality. And then I come to the fourth question. Are decent work deficit more pronounced in the informal economy? Actually, this is something you can read in recommendation 204, and this is heavily confirmed by data. Here I will show only one dimension. Actually, when we are talking about working condition, you can think of many different dimensions: representation security, employment security, working time, and many others. I will focus on income security, starting with wages, looking at employees. And when you look at the world situation in terms of employees, an informal employee tends to earn 56% of wages among formal workers. So that means that you have quite lower wages among informal employees. And looking beyond employees, but looking at poverty among workers in informal employment compared to workers in formal employment, and here we are looking at both employees, independent workers, contributing family workers, and others. You can see that actually when you look at informal workers, they are 2 times more likely to live in poor households than formal workers. So that means that they tend to be more exposed to poverty than others. Well, here it's a relative measure of poverty. When you look, we use some absolute poverty lines. The distinction is even higher. For the ratio, the difference is even higher. So voilà, I think it's done from my side. It was just to provide an overview. Naren, I remember that you were asking me the reliability of data and so on. Just a quick word to say that it's improving. We have data for more than 140 countries on informality. More and more countries collect data and analyze data on informality. And I'm quite confident that it will continue to improve, especially based on the latest ICLS that was adopted recently. Fred, the floor is yours.
Yes, thanks, Florence. So, as you have seen, it's a very complex policy challenge to tackle the issue of transition from the informal to the formal economy because of this heterogeneity of the informal employment. And for the policymakers, it's really they need to implement some integrated strategies to tackle those different policy domains which are important for transition to formality. And to do so, we have an international labor standard, which is recommendation 204, which was adopted in 2015. And it's a recommendation. And it provides policy guidelines and guiding principle for an integrated approach of transition to formality, and it's really the ILO approach of transition to formality. And what is very important, you know, in the ILO approach is the fact that transition to formality, it's a mean, it's not an end. At the end, it's not to register workers or to register economic units and to harass them if they are not moving out from informality. Formalization, it's a way, it's a mean for decent work for all, because you have acute decent work deficit in the informal economy. It's a mean for inclusive development, because, you know, it's a symptom, informality, of inequality. Yeah? And it's also very important for social justice. And when you have informal economy, you have structural obstacles for inclusive development, for social justice, for decent work for all. And then recommendation 204, yes, please, next, Laurence. They think about how to deal with this issue of promoting transition to formality. And it's very important to tackle the different forms of transition. So because you have all those people, workers, women and men in the informal economy, you have to facilitate the transition from those women and men from informal economy to the formal economy. That's the transition issue. And then you have all the new entrants, young workers, new entrants into the labor market. If they have no opportunities in the formal economy, they will have to go in the informal economy. So you have to generate formal employment. You need inclusive growth. You need structural transformation of your economy to provide formal jobs for all the new entrants into the labor market. And then you need to prevent informalization, because if you have unfair competition from the informal sector, then formal sector enterprises, they will tend to move out from formality to informality. So now if you look at the guiding principle of recommendation 204, and it's very important because it's the result of 2 years of general discussion within the committee for the standard setting of recommendation 204 among workers, employers, and governments. And they were able to put on the table of negotiation and to bargain about those issues, but they were able to highlight their concerns, their priorities, their red lines also in terms of transition to formality. And the key guiding principles are most people enter the informal economy not by choice, but as a consequence of a lack of opportunities in the informal economy. You have some very small minority of economic units who are choosing to be informal. But if you exclude illicit activities, most of those who are in the informal economy, just because they have the level of productivity, the level of access to market, the level of skills development, level of opportunities to move out from informality. Then you have formalization should go hand in hand with ensuring opportunities for income security, livelihoods, and entrepreneurship. Many people are making their living in the informal economy, so it's not about harassing them and making them their life difficult and not be able to secure their livelihoods. It's about providing them opportunities so they can move out from informality and secure their livelihoods in the formal economy. And then the need for integrated policy frameworks and a balanced approach for combining incentives with compliance measures. You know, and for a long time, we have specific policies on extension of social protection coverage or on micro and small enterprises formalization, on OSH issues, on organizing those in the informal economy. But if you are not articulating those different policy interventions in a framework, integrated framework, we will not be able to move out from informality. And we need to combine incentive with compliance. For all those who are in the informal sector, because they have no choice, you know, it will be, they need to engage themselves in this process of formality. So it must be attractive, it must be feasible to move out from informality. And so you need to provide those incentives, and not only using the stick, but we will come back about it later. And we need to pay special attention to those who are especially vulnerable to the most serious decent work deficit in the informal economy: women, young people, people living with disabilities. migrant workers. You have very vulnerable groups in the informal economy, and very often they are hard to reach group for policymakers to move them out from informality. Yes, please. And then the ILO approach is really based on tackling the root causes of informality. You know, informality, it's a symptom. So we need to see what is behind the symptoms and the root causes. And we can see the root causes, it's about macroeconomic and structural causes, economic crisis, the pattern of growth, the structure of the labor market and the economy. It's also about the characteristic of workers and economic units, low productivity, low education, poverty, small micro and small enterprises, low level of organization. And it's also about the legal, regulatory, and institutional framework, the issue of trust, the issue of appropriate regulatory framework, the issue of weak enforcement system, lack of communication and awareness, lack of incentives. You have all those issues that we have to tackle if we want to have an impact in terms of transition to formality. Next, please. And it's very important when we are promoting and supporting the effort at country level for transition to formality. We have basic principles we are putting forward for effective formalization policies. Without sustained productivity growth, there is no sustained informality reduction. We have to work on enabling productivity ecosystems to increase earnings and to increase the opportunity to engage in the transition to formality. There is no formal employment without labor rights. And we have to increase compliance mechanism. We have to enforce labor rights. That's very in the formal, like in the informal economy. Informality is not a monolithic or homogeneous block, so no one-size-fits-all policies. It has to be context-specific. We can have also some specific sectoral policies to tackle informal employment. There is no quick or one-size-fits-all solution, like I said. Formalization must contribute to just transition against the backdrop of climate and technological change. Very important, this link between the impact on environment ecosystem of informal activities and the way people are securing their livelihoods. Sometimes they are over-exploiting the ecosystem and creating some issues. But also how climate change and migration is also a factor of informal employment. And then formalization requires inclusion, dialogue, social dialogue, and implementation. Yes, please. And but very quickly, but it's very important to understand the stages in terms of dealing with the challenge of transition to formality. For a long time, because, you know, to be in the informal economy, it's not complying to the legal and regulatory framework. So it was the first generation of policies tackling the informal economy was a lot about deterrence, sanction, negative reinforcement. But as I said, you know, if most of the people, they have no choice, whatever is the strength of a stick, if you have no choice, you will try to avoid the stick, but you will not be able to move out from informality because that is where you are securing your livelihoods and you have no opportunities elsewhere. So the second generation was really about incentives, how to provide the right incentive for economic units, for on-account workers to move out from, to engage in these processes of transition. So to facilitate registration, to have appropriate tax system, to provide some schemes, a social protection scheme in health insurance, pension schemes for on-account workers, to have all those issues which are incentive for those in the informal economy to engage in a process of transition to formality. But what we have seen, next please, is the fact that, you know, there is a risk of combining incentives and enforcement measures without an enabling productivity ecosystem and sustainable enterprise environment. Whatever are the incentives, whatever are also the sanction. If you have low earnings, low productivity, you have no capacity to move out from informality. So it's very important to tackle this challenge of low productivity, low earnings, which is really connected to the issue of informal economy and informal employment. And to do so, next please, what we are putting forward, and it's that the ILO approach based on the recommendation 204, but it's really the framework of the 4-Light project for the Latin America countries and the Caribbean countries, which is a major program and effort of the ILO to support ILO constituents in Latin American and Caribbean countries to promote transition to formality. And what they put together is an integrated policy framework combining and articulating specific measures for productive development policies, specific measures for employment and capacity building policies, specific measures on social protection policies, and specific measures on policies for the recognition and enforcement of labor rights and incentives, and how we can articulate and try to think, if you improve productivity, you improve earnings, and you make possible for micro and small enterprises to register their workers or to invest in skills development. In the same time, if you invest in social protection, if you invest in skills development, you improve productivity and the capacity of economic units to formalize. So, it's all interrelated, and that's why you need this integrated policy framework. Next, please. And once you have an integrated policy framework, you need, next, please. You need coordination. And coordination is very important. You need this effort of coordination and giving a coherence to the strategy for transition to formality. And that's why, the DG has established those priority action programs on key issues to provide a more effective technical assistance to the countries and to our constituents and governments, workers, employers, organizations on key issues. So you have an action program on formalization, you have an action program on just transition, you have an action program on supply chain, you have an action program on crisis, and it's key policy areas that present significant challenges and opportunities for the promotion of social justice through decent work, which is the core mandate of the ILO. Yes, please. And to speak specifically, and that's the two last slides, on the action program formalization, I'm leading, and we are a team with Florence, and we are expanding slowly. What we will do, and it's our main task, is really to enable the consolidation and expansion of in-house expertise, so across the ILO, and knowledge on key policy areas of the world of work. That's very important, and to see how we can better combine policy domains like social protection, enterprise formalization, organization of workers or economic units in the informal economy. It's about effective coordination and integration of policies and activities across the different areas of the ILO works, and the provision of integrated support to constituents. So we have a program and budget with target activities at country level. So you have some target activities on enterprise formalization or extension of social protection coverage to those in the informal economy, for example. And we will add an additional target activity about coordinating the different interventions to increase the impact and to be able to have a better impact in terms of transformative change at country level, and then strengthen the positioning of the ILO globally and mainstream the ILO approach, integrated approach, which is based on social dialogue and integrated policy frameworks. And to end, some key issues about what now. We need to fill the gaps for designing effective integrated policy frameworks and coordination mechanism. We need knowledge production on those issues, in particular for some specific sectors or some specific vulnerable groups. We need to support knowledge sharing on South-South cooperation. We need to support diagnostics in line with the new ICLS resolution on informal employment. We need to map and disseminate innovative approaches and tools through what we will try to do in 2024. We will organize in each region some regional knowledge sharing forums where we will discuss good practices, innovative approaches, concerns of challenges of constituents to strengthen their capacities to deliver on this issue of transition to formality. And very important, those regional knowledge sharing forums, they will feed a background document for the ILC general discussion in 2025, which will be on innovative approaches for transition to formality. So it's very important. And what is also important is the fact that the issue of transition to formality will be at the heart of the discussion of the UN Summit of the Future, which will take place in September 2024, and also of the UN Social Conference in 2025. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, please, Naren, over to you first.
Thank you, Fred. Thank you, Flo, for your insights on the informality issue. And I will let the participants then look into the data and how they are going to appraise those data that you have presented. I'll leave the floor open for some interaction, some questions you might have. I know we are running out of time. There's so much things to present and talk to you. If you have any questions, please go ahead.
And please, Naren, you will share my contact and Florence contact, so you can contact us, read also the presentation, because we have shared it with you. So you will have also more time to think about it. And please don't hesitate to contact us for additional comments and questions about it.
Yeah, Fred, thank you so much. And Flo, for your time, for coming and sharing your wisdom with us, with our learners, with our constituents. So thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Let's give them a big hand. Please show them the big hands that we have in our tool. Lovely. Great. Well done, guys. Thank you. I think we are coming to an end of this session of today. Before I give the floor back to Vincenzo and Bavika, just to emphasize what we went through in terms of how would you appraise evidence and then try working on your policy briefs. Next session that we have on Friday will be where Bavika will be leading. We will teach you how to start writing your policy briefs. So if you have not got your policy question now, you have to be a little bit worried about, right? Make sure you have your policy question and then you have all the evidence in order to start writing your policy briefs. So thank you very much for your attention, for your engagement, and interaction. I leave the floor to Vincenzo and Bavika for other logistical issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Naren. Yes, Bavika, please go first. I don't know if you have any tips or for the participant, maybe something that you would like to emphasize also in light of the one-to-one session with the participants. So you go first, please.
Sure. Thanks, Vincenzo. All right, so I only have a couple of points like I repeat after every session. That first is that please go ahead and share your feedback with us on today's session. You will find the evaluation form on the eCampus, and many of you have been filling it religiously. So thank you for that. Thank you for sharing your comments. We go through them and try to answer the questions that you have put up either on the eCampus itself or we share it in the next session. So we'll do the same as we promised. And second would be that now that the sessions are getting more intense, I'm sure that some of you might be feeling that way. So Friday's session is again going to be really going into the weeds of developing your policy brief. How does the format look like? So it's really going to get very, very intense going forward. So the idea would be that, as Naren said, that you have your steps in place, you have your policy question. But if there is anyone who is still struggling with it, then please make use of the book a meeting section on the eCampus. And Naren and I, both of us, will be very happy to walk you through the steps individually on a one-on-one basis. And we'll look forward to connecting with you all. With that, I think that's all. It's the middle of the week, so we usually tend to get a little slower. That's how it works for me. But hopefully on Friday we'll be high on hopes because it's Friday and then we'll have the weekend. But till then, take care and we'll see you on Friday. Over to you, Vincenzo. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Bhavika. Thank you, Naren. Nothing special to add from my side, also because I know that we're running out of time. So just thank you for your interaction. Thank you for being here with us. Any further doubt, discussion that you would like to further, have with us, feel free to, again, to write on the campus platform, on the forum, and we will reconvene on Friday. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you all.
Thank you, bye.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.